doing all the time, right? And there's no formal necessity to learning. I think right now we're all sort of realizing how tied those two things were for so long, like as just a formal process that we always thought that education and learning were synonymous, and that it happened in these brick and mortar locations or even MOOCs, but structured ways that were very specific to how we had to learn. Now, I think as parents, as a parent, I'm seeing ways my kids are learning, but I think it's enlightening a large swath of America and hopefully the world around how there might be ways to change and grow and really distribute the wealth of knowledge and learning in different functionalities moving forward. So it's a challenging time. I think the amount of hair loss I've had trying to homeschool my children is not an insignificant amount, but it at least is opening up their eyes to how it works and how important being in school is. But also the opportunity that's out there, being able to log on to the Smithsonian website and do a tour, or be able, I just think there's so much opportunity right now, and it's ripe for disruption. Disruption happened fast. It was forced upon us. And this sort of discussion, I hope, can be something that keeps on moving us forward on what's next.
Yeah. And I'd love to get more into the whole notion of homeschooling. I heard someone say recently that, starting in March, what used to be 3% of the population that homeschooled suddenly became 99% of the population that was homeschooling. And I know that's something, Rohit, you were talking about as well. But I'd love to tie back to your concept of instant knowledge too, because I know you had your megatrends, 10 megatrends, the sort of capstone of your yearly trend spotting book, dropped like it was hot, and it's still hot. It dropped back in January. I'd love to get maybe a fresh take on instant knowledge in particular, and then any other of your big trends in terms of what did this pandemic and the pandemic response and sheltering at home, what impact has that had on some of the trends you may have been tracking previously?
To me, the most interesting thing that happened when we started shifting a lot of how we did things is that we accelerated what probably would have happened later to happen much, much more quickly. And as a result of that, I think that a lot of us kind of discovered the other side, right? So think about homeschooling. Like the people who were homeschooling really helped one another, and there was huge communities around homeschooling, but it was still a small population of parents that were doing that. And maybe you knew somebody who was homeschooling, maybe you didn't, but it seemed kind of like they were over there and we were over here. We being the ones who were sending our kids to school in an actual building. And now we're all kind of together, and we're looking at their example and saying, maybe they were onto something. Like maybe they figured something out. And also, how can people possibly do this all the time? Like, this is crazy.
Right.
And so we're adjusting faster. And you're seeing that not just in education. I mean, you're seeing it in terms of restaurants. And 2 years ago, there were ghost kitchens, what used to be called ghost kitchens, which were these ideas of delivery-only restaurants. So a place that made the food and you could pick it up or get it delivered, but you couldn't sit down and eat. There was no place to sit. And now restaurants are being forced to convert into that. And so that started taking off. I mean, people watching esports as a version of sports because we can't watch live sports. And so we're watching people playing video games. And that was also around with Twitch years ago, but it was still kind of only certain people did it. And so what I'm finding in many of these different places is these things, these ideas that seemed foreign and that seemed like, okay, those people over there are doing that, but that's not me. Now we are them. Like we're all together. Right,
exactly. And I've heard the term, and I've used it a bit, like the pandemic response has been a forcing function for all of us. Things that used to be an option, like distance learning has always been around. It's been around for 30 years. But folks have been selective in their use. People talked about, the advent of MOOCs, massive open online courses in 2012. It was supposed to transform everything. People saw it was out there, but at the end of the day, they would still gravitate back to the face-to-face. Dan Kowalski in the chat's talking about, the institution providing the infrastructure beyond helping learning. Higher ed's talking a lot about that nowadays, where, what are those intangible social functions that, many of us have very fond memories of our college experience, I'll be the first to confess, it's not all about learning that I did while I was in college. It's about the relationships. It's about the social dynamics. It's about the serendipity of running into somebody in the community center or on the quad. So like the fact that everyone's been forced on a global level into digital, there's another question that I think we'll get to a little bit more from Beth Hasten, just about how much are we actually accelerating due to the pandemic response. Melissa, we're going to throw it to you again. This time I think you're going to catch it, and I have a good feeling about it. Any general thoughts as you're back? But that was an illustrative example, right, of how technology is an enabler, but it also can be challenging, right?
I'm so glad we planned it that way. It wasn't that I missed a tech check and had some problems. I'm glad we planned it to prove the point that I was going to make first off the bat. For distance learning, for this to work as we go forward, I really think technology is going to be either a huge help or a huge hindrance, especially when you think about economies of scales for the haves and haves not, right? Like not everyone can afford the bandwidth power that's going to take this, can actually have laptops in their place. And I think that's something that we're going to have to solve as an educational challenge if we're gonna get past this point, right? And we all want to learn. We all want this to work. Like there's got to be some element of online learning that's going to happen, but in order for it to happen, like we've got to get past these challenges that I'm likely still facing, which is why I'm using a different monitor right now as well.
Yeah, but I mean, and Gabrielle's saying in chat, if you have 5 people in your home and they're all using the same network, how many laptops, how many screens do you have to go around? How much connectivity do you have? Not to mention just managing multiple children in the home. So I know I only have one 17-month-old, so I'm kind of fortunate in that respect. But I know both Rohit and Dan have multiple kids in the home. I'd love to talk more about that because that is another huge trend.
Well, Rohit, you just released Virtual, right? Which is a book talking about
I did
the virtual life, right? And virtual work. So I've been working from home for 5.5 years, almost 6 years now. I worked in New York City, working from home, as Mike, my former manager, puts in air quotes there. But we did some great work together. It was positive times. So 5.5 years or so, 6 starting in June. Virtual work has been difficult for me to adjust to. It was a learning period of how I work. But I didn't have my children here. I didn't have my wife necessarily needing Zoom and Facebook help at the same time as me being on Zoom meetings and my 2 kids who are in school being on Zoom, and then having to figure out, because the 2.5-year-old needs to be like her older sisters, she has to have some device in her hand, and I'm running around like an IT tech all of a sudden. From your perspective and what you wrote about and how you see this, maybe the acceleration of virtual, the acceleration of all of us buying in, is this a paradigm shift? Is this the new normal? Or do you see this as a slow push forward that's going to pull back once everything opens up and people are able to go back to work?
I think some of it will be a shift that will probably go away. And the reason why I say that, and by the way, before I say that, I just want to say welcome to the folks who are watching on Facebook Live. We're live streaming this right now. And then we've also got this as a webinar on Zoom. So thank you for everybody who's sharing some of your great conversations here. I see Dan Kowalski, you've got some great comments in here. We're going to jump into those. Mike, I know you're going to read some of these and maybe bring some of the folks who are chatting into the conversation. But if you haven't shared any of those and you're on the Zoom webinar version of this, you can definitely go and, sorry, let me move my camera back on. You can definitely put it into the chat there. If you're watching on Facebook, let us know where you're watching from, put a comment in there, and we'll try and give you feedback on that. And by the way, that timer wasn't like my camera's going to die. It's this 30-minute thing that I have with my camera. It's like we're keeping ourselves honest, I think, because the camera's telling me when I've been on for 30 minutes so I can track it. It's like this little timer that goes off that lets me know. So anyway, it's just,
there was a comment just before it went off that said, we love your video quality tell us what you're using, Rohit.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I'll put a link to it, but basically my camera is a Nikon D5500 with a 35 millimeter lens. So it's a DSLR camera. So that's my actual office back there. But anyway, that's like a side thing. So Dan, I want to get back to what you were asking. And I do think that some of it will go away. And the reason why I say that is right now we're all at home and we have to do virtual meetings. And the upside of that is that I think a lot of people have realized that, look, I can learn and I can work from home. And that's going to be a normal part of my schedule now. And so I don't need to go to school maybe 5 days a week or maybe more days a week, depending on how much you go to school. I don't need to go to work that many days a week either. I can work remotely. So the days that I do go in, I'm going to spend with people. I'm going to spend in the meetings. And I think that the new version of work for many people is going to be 1 day a week, they go home, work from home, and do their actual work and do 0 meetings. And when they do go into the office, they'll do all of their meetings because then they're face to face, and it's just an optimal use of time. And so like this whole world that we're living in where we're on video all day, on Zoom calls, and every meeting is a Zoom call, even the ones that don't need to be, where we could probably have done it as a phone call and let each other multitask like normal humans instead of watching each other the whole time. Like that's going to shake itself out, and people are going to say, wait, does this really need to be on video? Maybe not.
Yeah, but I go ahead, Melissa.
No, I was saying, can I challenge that notion a little bit, though, Rohit? Because one, multitasking, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing in the world of working? I often think sometimes in meetings we are not focused enough, and so the meetings go on longer than they should be, right? And so I am curious, right? Like I actually, and so I'm looking for your advice. Right now, even before we went to a completely virtual world, I would always force my team to be on camera because I do want the engaging aspect of it. I want the focus in the meeting. I don't want people to be multitasking because I think when people are multitasking, they're missing stuff. And when they're missing stuff that like, I don't want to have a meeting for the sake of having a meeting. I want to make sure that people are there, engaged, we're making a decision and we're going away. Because I do feel like that's something that the natural tension that we're going to have to face because it is so much easier to multitask even when you are on camera.
Right.
Yeah, look, I there's nothing that you said that I can disagree with. The only thing I will say, and this might be slightly controversial, but there are probably a decent number of meetings that you're involved in where you don't really need to have 100% attention and you'd still get what you need out of it. Like, for example, we do these update meetings where it's like, okay, there's certain people doing updates for what they're working on that concern me. And there's certain people who are doing updates for stuff that had nothing to do with what I'm working on. And we spend a lot of, you're right, that these meetings go on forever. Some classes in the education sense go on for longer because someone dictates to them. Like I remember when I was teaching my class at Georgetown, we only met once a week. And so our class had to be a certain length. Right. It wasn't because I said, look, I have this much material to go through and I need to do it. It's because someone said, okay, if it's only meeting once a week, the class should be 4 hours long. Like that's just how long it should be. And somebody decided that, right? And I think we can start to maybe unpack that and get away from it a little bit and say, look, we're not constrained by that anymore. Like we can make it certain days. We can actually optimize it.
Mike, you've talked in the past about async versus live, right? And I think we've sort of forced everything to live right now. And I think you've talked about it too. This has been emergency management teaching, right? It's been this sort of reaction. And so if we are online again in the fall, there has to be a discussion, or at least my opinion, there has to be a discussion around the value prop, like Rohit was just talking about time served. Do you see something coming out of this where people can right size, I'll say learning in this purpose, maybe not education, but learning to just provide what's necessary, not the time filler that Rohit was just talking about, not, making it an hour and a half because that's how long a seminar class was in college, but giving what they need. Do you see that as a potential benefit and a force fit for people moving forward?
Yeah, I do. And I actually think it's really, we're seeing a lot of the comments in chat about, I definitely want to get into the question of equity and inclusion, which Melissa touched on as well. So like the one theme that I got out of everything that all of the panelists were talking about just now is like to be intentional about your use of technology, where I think a lot of what has happened is we've been reactive about our use. So we lost in-person face-to-face. We needed to replace it with something. Let's use Zoom video meetings and just stack our days end to end with Zoom meetings. I think what Rohit, what you're talking about, which I completely hear, is the idea of Zoom fatigue and the idea of I will perform better if I can build breaks into my day so that when I need to be on camera, and to your point, Melissa, I do agree, when you're trying to understand comprehension and get engagement from everyone, you want everyone to be on camera. It'd be odd if any of the panelists right now were off camera. We'd want to know, like, what are you actually up to? You know?
You mean when I was off camera?
Sorry,
exactly.
And now it's off camera.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Exactly. I know these emails, they keep coming. But so I think the idea of being intentional about your use is something that those of us who have all this access, all this technology at our fingertips, we can be intentional about it. But one of the themes, it was actually the runner-up in our Trending in Education March Madness brackets. One of the themes that we've been tracking is the notion of digital inclusion. And I saw that from a handful of folks in the chat really wanting to understand, Toby Elkin talking about at Baruch College, CUNY. When we talk about the promise of digital learning, we frequently take it as a given. People are going to have a high-speed connection. They're going to have a safe home. They're going to have all the tools and access points that they need to really lean in. We know that's not true. That's not even true for families who are relatively privileged. They're competing for resources. If you extend that into really the more difficult use cases that we all know are out there, it's a very harsh reality. And then I do want to make sure we pivot a little bit towards healthcare too, because you compound that with those same folks who don't really know digital, don't have ways to use telehealth. I want to get the group's perspective on telehealth as well, but maybe picking up with you, Rohit, thoughts on just the disparities that exist around digital access and how to think about that when talking about the future of education and talk about, how we design solutions. And then from there, I'd like to get a little more time on healthcare, because I think that's sort of an interesting space. That's, to me, it's working from home, telehealth, and distance learning are like the three legs in like the new use of space that has emerged in light of the pandemic response. But I'd love to get you maybe to start, and then a little bit of around the horn, Rohit. Just any thoughts on the disparities that are out there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have been thinking about, and the digital divide has been there for a long time and continues to be there, and it is a big challenge because not everybody has equal access to technology. And for a long time, I think that if you asked anyone who was teaching in a larger class about their teaching style, what the best teachers have always done is they've been able to cater to learners who learn better in different ways. So some people are more visual learners, some people are more kind of hands-on and experiential, and great teachers are able to cater their lesson plan to those different types of learners. And I think that now the digital equivalent of that is going to be that teachers and organizations are going to have to figure out, like, what is the gifted technology version of this in terms of like somebody who has access to all of this, and what's the lower technology requirement version of this? Maybe it's audio, maybe it includes more access to things that are on demand as opposed to live streaming, which requires higher bandwidth. These are the sorts of things that I think we're going to have to try and figure out. And by the way, the other thing I'll mention is, it's become in wealthier places with better school districts. I think one of the most commonplace things has become students get a computer. All students get a computer, right? So at least at my son's school, which is a private school, a public school, sorry, every high schooler gets a computer because it's a well-funded public school. Now, my son doesn't need the school computer. He has a computer, but there's no real way for us to say, you can give that to somebody else. Because it's just a default thing. And so here we are sitting here with a kid who's lucky, who has a nice house to live in and has good Wi-Fi and has now 2 computers. And I don't know who to give that to. I don't know who to help with that. Now, I didn't pay for I guess I did pay for the computer with my taxes, but I didn't specifically pay for the computer. And I would love to be able to give it to someone who could use it. But how do I do that? Right? I don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And we're seeing some comments here. Dan Kowalski's talking about in Eastern Tennessee, going a little bit old school and teaching through television, to your point, Rohit, like having almost like the equivalent of like a fat client or a prosumer version of, like, if you really want to be a power user, you can get new levels of engagement out of digital, but then also having a more standardized view, which I think is great. And then an interesting question from Natalie Long here: what creative ways have parents, schools worked out to reach families that aren't engaging in online learning? So not just about the digital divide, but also the fact that some folks are not going to engage. And I've been trying to track, and the data, it's still too soon, what's the impact going to be on dropout rates, or, how many students who are maybe marginal or at risk are going to wind up just exiting the educational system entirely. I think it's an interesting question out there. And any thoughts, Melissa, Dan, any thoughts on how to identify those families and students who are not engaging, and ways in which we might be able to draw them back in?
I mean, I know I've heard of, like, as I do the research and read a lot, I've heard of ways people are doing it, right? I think there are so many social factors that need to come through it. Like, teachers right now they're printing out on their printers at home, they're printing out the assignments and they're taking it over to the kids and dropping it off at the doors. That's what they've been doing. Like, but we've touched on this before, like, that is only one. Actually getting the information to the student is only one aspect of it. Getting them to engage in it, like, even if they were willing learners, is going to be another thing, right? Because now they're home. Their parents are probably, like, these people are probably the people who are now the frontline workers who are still going out there. So these kids are being left, like, with one adult managing like 10 kids or so, for example. And it's a real challenge, because we're touching on just how do we get the education there. Schools have a secondary purpose, right? There are a lot of these low income areas. The schools provide meals for the students, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and those things are missing too, right? So you're asking me to engage in education when I'm not even sure how I'm going to feed my kid, because and that's what, like, that is what's really worrisome if we stay in this prolonged world, and what we have got to figure out if the new normal looks like a hybrid of this. And I don't think the government is ready for it.
Yeah.
Right.
So two things: a plug for training and education. Mike, you had Angela Seifer on a couple of times, who does the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, I think, NDIA. Great spokesman for inclusion and digital equity, and how she's been working to end the digital divide. I would suggest those who are watching here on Facebook to go check that out. Really interesting conversation. A very interesting woman who's done some great work in her lifetime to try to help this process. What I found interesting in my hometown here in Massachusetts is they have made sure that meals are available. They've made breakfast and lunch available for 5 days a week. It's 1 day pickup. So it is sort of, it's not a hot meal. So you are taking some negatives there. They have provided laptops to any students who said they needed it. So you don't necessarily get one. I think you get one in 9th grade, similar to Rohit, what you were saying. My kids are younger than that. But if you are an elementary or middle school student whose parents said they need one, then they got one. They partnered with the city and local businesses to provide hotspots. So trying to figure out hotspot and that. And I've seen in Boston specifically, they've been using buses as Wi-Fi, portable Wi-Fis. Yeah. So basically pulling up to apartment buildings where maybe it's not hooked up the way it is, and figuring that out. For disengaged students, one of the best things I heard was on a webinar I was on a couple of weeks back and listening. I was producing it for the day job. And the guest said, it's now more than ever that teachers are obviously our most important asset, right? And we are seeing that tenfold with the amount of work that teachers are putting in now compared to what they were already doing is astounding. And I hope everyone thanks their teachers and make sure to let them know that they appreciate the work they're doing. But if they can go that extra step and send a physical card, a letter, a note, something to engage with them on a different level than this, and on email, make it personal again. Maybe it's stopping a kid in the hallway and saying, hey, I noticed you haven't been listening in class. Sending that note, sending a birthday card, sending something that is more tangible, I think is one of those things. And obviously it's up to the teacher or up to the administrator, and that's more work for them to do. Right. But I do think that's one of the steps I've seen that has really hit home as a way to engage those who may otherwise be recessing to the back, may shut their camera off in the Zoom meeting, may not turn in their work on time. And Mike, like you hit on it, there's a lot of other things going on there. Maybe they don't want their classmates to see their background. You know, maybe they don't have the best living situation. Maybe they don't want people to hear their parents fighting or whatever it might be. And I think, again, this is emergency management time right now. We're triaging, we're trying to figure out, and a lot of us are just trying to claw for the end of the year, just hit that summer break.
Right.
But I do think if we are still in the same position in September, I think there will hopefully be a lot of lessons learned, and we'll right-size a lot more things about inclusion, about reach, about connectivity. And the other thing I'll throw in, Mike, and close here is I've heard a lot about buddy systems. Getting the students to buddy up with each other, and the teachers too, right? Like, let the teachers have buddies. Let the teachers have someone to complain to and connect with and be on the same level as. I think that's a good one too. Like, give them personal connection.
But I think the flip side of that, or maybe the slight addition to your awesome list, Dan, of things that we could do, is something that we did with one of my son's teachers, which I think the teacher found really helpful, which is feedback to them that something worked, because we're all trying this in a new way. And sometimes as a teacher, or even as a speaker myself, like, I don't exactly always know what resonated for someone. But when someone comes to me and says, hey, that thing you said, or that way that you taught this thing really worked, like the students really got it, that's super valuable for them as feedback. And in addition to just saying, hey, you're doing a good job. Like, this is not an easy thing to reinvent how you teach something, especially for those teachers who've been teaching something for 20 years. I mean, imagine you've been doing something 20 years in one way, and now you're forced almost overnight to change the way you do it. I mean, that's not easy for anybody.
Yeah, I really love that point, Rohit, too, because one of the challenges with emergency remote teaching, there was a really good EDUCAUSE article that I'm referencing where they made a distinction between traditional online learning, which has more like instructional design and learning science applied to it. Emergency remote teaching is what we just did, where everyone had to suddenly move in that direction. And a lot of teachers are already under tremendous pressure, and they're used to getting real-time feedback where you can see those nonverbals, you can spend a little extra time helping the kid who needs extra help. Now you don't have that, and the feedback you're likely to get as a teacher nowadays is probably going to be critical. At least if you listen in a public forum. So if there are ways to tap into positive feedback and there are ways for parents to give that feedback, I think that would be great. I also saw Hassan's question was really interesting too, just around what's in the future for this. Because it's too much to ask a single teacher to navigate this complexity that's been foisted upon them. Probably also true for parents. You know, like, parents are juggling a tremendous amount of pressure. Asking them to solve this by themselves is really unrealistic. I think ultimately it is going to require more partnerships, and the forms of those partnerships are going to be interesting. You know, so I'd love to maybe hear from you, Melissa, a bit about that too. Thinking about how do private companies come in? How does philanthropy come in? How does volunteerism come in? Any thoughts on that from your perspective?
I mean, I think I think Dan had put it in the chat earlier. I think a lot of the tech companies are going to have to get involved, right? You're going to have to see the Microsofts and the Googles come in and put more more computers into the hands. Like, I know companies like Verizon and AT&T, they're going to have to spin up like special Wi-Fi hubs and places in lower income places that is free. And I know a lot of them have piloted these things in the past. Like, that, if this world is going to continue the way it is, like, that has got to be a part of the solution. And the companies, we're going to rely on the companies a lot more to do that sort of work.
Yeah, and local governments are going to be stretched. State governments are stretched. The federal government doesn't really have as much of an impact on local schools.
And to be honest, right, like, it's interesting, right? Because, like, when you initially said it, I think about the Warren Buffetts and the Microsoft guy, now that
Bill Gates
of the world. But Bill Gates is literally focused on health right now, right? He's focused on how do you solve this pandemic problem. And so if their minds are there, like, what are the next generation of minds that are coming in to solve the education problem, which is going to be a real problem if this goes on for a long time. And I don't think the governments, even the local governments, have the know-how in their infrastructure right now to solve it, right? Technology has always been a back burner for them. And so I would be surprised. They're going to have to scale up quickly.
Yeah, and it is a great time, I think, to be an innovator or disruptor in the educational space. Like if you understand, I'd like to say I've been an ad hoc instructional designer for 20 years. And as of March, the rest of the world caught up to me, so suddenly everyone's trying to figure out and answer questions around how do you do the design of the instruction and the experience digitally. There was some interesting chat too, just about blending synchronous and asynchronous, which reminds me of what Rohit was talking about around the way the workforce has evolved. I think you're going to see more and more of that at home, and just like organizations are going to have to trust that their remote employees are doing what you want them to do when you don't have them visually in front of you. I think frequently, high schools and K-12 and universities are going to also have to embrace a little bit of that. In some ways, there's a leap of faith that's going to have to happen around trusting the learner to engage and then holding folks accountable for their work. I think it's going to be a wildly disruptive time, but I think for folks who can lean into observing what's happening and then trying to get out ahead, also being open to be opportunistic in terms of your career path. It's likely that all of us are going to be doing a different job than we were doing in February for the next 6 months at least. And then I'd love to get an around the horn on general read on how much, Rohit, you were kind of touching on this, like how much we're going to go back to what we were doing before and how much we think the world really won't go fully back. The closest analogy I have is the Great Depression. And despite my advanced years, I wasn't alive for it. I've only read about it in books, but it is a profound shift and it's very behavioral. Everyone's behaviors are changing at the same time. So it does feel like this will be like a watershed moment in a lot of ways in terms of the way we all engage. Rohit, I know you look at beyond education, you look at the whole world, consumer behavior and media and all that. General thoughts on, what this is going to feel like maybe a year or two down the road? Like, is this going to be a long-standing behavioral shift for all of us, or do we think we're going to go back?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be a behavioral shift because it's going to be a while until we can go back to all of the things that we were doing. And I think that even more importantly, I think that a lot of us are asking the questions now. Those of us who have the luxury to ask the question are wondering, that thing I was doing before, like, did I really even need to do that? All right. Like I'm thinking about that, particularly with travel. I used to travel all the time. And, I haven't woken up at 4 a.m. for a 6 a.m. flight in months. And it's amazing. I love it. But it's not just about waking up, right? It's about that whole, like, get on the plane, deal with that whole thing, jump into that meeting for literally an hour sometimes. And like, that was part of my life. And I think that in the educational sense, like there's also this idea of the traditions that we had in terms of how we would get to school, how much time we would spend in school. Do we need to go every day? Could we have one day off, one day on? Could we flip the classroom, which has been kind of the concept that's been around for a while, right? Where you watch the lectures on your own pace, you develop mastery. I mean, that's the whole philosophy behind the Khan Academy, right? Like you get the mastery so that you don't get left behind. And we knew these things, right? I mean, we'd seen people do TED Talks about them, but they were slow to be incorporated because big institutions, particularly big educational institutions, move slowly sometimes when it comes to those sorts of things. And I think, that is causing reinvention on the sort of younger scale. On the older scale, when it comes to higher education, I think that there's the real business question there too, which is that money that was once perhaps justifiable, but has been exploding and heavily criticized over the last at least several years about like, should we really be paying this much for these, for this degree? That's really going to serve some people, some really concerning reminders that, look, we need to be able to stand there and say, this is an experience that's worth it. And if people are, I'm reading about all sorts of high school seniors choosing to defer, saying, look, I and that creates a whole business model challenge, right? Because as soon as they defer the revenue that they would have generated, or the revenue from the international students, which has dramatically gone down, means that these higher educational institutions don't have enough to give the financial aid to all of the other students who can't afford it. And so it's just like this domino effect, right?
Yeah. Especially if you think about the mid-tier private universities, not a big endowment, they basically make each year based on hitting their enrollment targets. I've heard next year being dubbed the Corona gap year, where many kids are just going to take a year. Families are going to say, we want you to take a year. We want you to defer. I think there's some opportunity to, take advantage of the great informal learning, compile together your best in class educational experience while you're doing other things for that year. But we're really like off the map in terms of forecasting the year on the horizon. And there's a lot of folks, particularly not, the big endowments, they have big endowments, the big universities, they have online programs already, but it's more the 4,000 plus institutions of higher education in the US. There's going to be a winnowing of that. It was forecasted for 5 years down the horizon. I think it's something that's going to be happening right away. You guys see any other questions you want to cherry pick out of chat?
There's some great discussion going on, and our old friend Owen Farsi there in chat. So hello to him. But I think one thing that is very interesting here is the cost of higher education has obviously been something that we've discussed many times over. Some people are talking in chat. Will it go down? Will these universities that are going online say, hey, we're going to have your tuition bill because you're not on campus? Probably not. They probably won't be doing that. So do you get the value of the social aspect by just attending online? I think that's a really interesting question, one I don't know the answer to, but one to track into the fall. There's a mention here about community college, that, there's the discussion around the gap year versus community college versus waiting to accept your acceptance or enroll. And I think to Rohit's point, that waterfall can't go both ways, but I think there is a way here that there's opportunity for some students who may be able to get into that, reach school, to use that term, because someone else decided to take a gap year, someone who had the privilege to take the gap year and take the time off and wait to see what's next. You may see some people moving up into schools that they may not have otherwise had a seat at. And I do think you're going to see, to your point, Mike, in the middle, they're going to lose to both sides. They're going to lose to those students who move up in rank, and they're going to see a bunch of students who say, you know what, I'm just going to stay close to home. I'm going to take a year at my community college, make sure I get my credits. Maybe I work a little bit. I help out around the house. Someone was talking before about the privilege of the parents not having to work. There are a lot of homes where parents do have to work. And there are a lot of homes where first generation potential college students are actually helping pay the bills by working. And like, those are all the moving parts that happen on the lower rungs of higher education that I think will, to Rohit's part, is that cascading effect. So it's all fascinating to me. I think there's a lot of human interest here, a lot of social change happening along with education and health, like you were talking before, Mike.
Right. So just to shift a little bit to the pivot between learning and education, which I think would be an interesting thing. Also, if folks in the chat have any perspective on this, like your take on learning versus education, and your take on where, what should we do? Like, how do we lean in? How do we lean in as learners? And also, like, I keep coming back to the quote. It's attributed to both Abraham Lincoln and Alan Kay, which is, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Like, it does feel like we're at a critical point in time where we don't have the comfort of the pre-existing patterns of behavior. Everyone's feeling a little shook. What do we do? What do we do with this energy? How do we activate as individuals, as learners, and then maybe as change agents to begin what hopefully will be a bit of a pivot in the future? Any thoughts on that, Melissa? I know you've got some thoughts, and we want to share talk time.
My thoughts were Rohit's camera is stressing me out a little bit too. Was the first thought that went through my head. But it's a good way to focus so you're not on camera too long. So I like it. I like it. I have anyone who says they can predict the future like with absolute certainty is crazy. just as my job of forecasting has showed me, it's like the one thing I can assure about is I'm going to get it wrong. The thing I do think higher ed and even beyond higher ed learning, that is where the real opportunity lies. I think in the high school and K-12 space, it's going to be hard, right? There are going to be a lot of challenges to face, and the government, it's a much more highly regulated space. The government's going to have to get involved. In the higher ed, I think as Dan was talking, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to community college. Like, I can get that information online for free right now. You think about how quickly I can build my own case between Coursera for free, between YouTube, which is one of the places people go to learn a lot of new skills, LinkedIn Learning. Like, I think there's so much opportunity to, in that gap year, like figure out how to educate yourself, figure out ways to test your education. And I think companies who are going to win in this space, and I'm sure you're going to see a lot of ed tech and a lot of innovation coming out in how do we curate content for people? How do we figure out how to best maximize the time that these students use it? That I for sure, I think, Rohit, this was your point, that like $100,000 degree is not looking good to me if I don't get to hang out with my friends, because that is the only reason. Let's be honest, we all for sure went to grad school, and probably a lot of us went to college for. And like, am I going to do it, or am I going to just try and figure out a way to get the same degree from different sources? Like, and I think companies who put that together are going to win. There are a lot of companies playing in that space.
There's some interesting, Shannon Clute had a really interesting comment in chat too, talking about the two promises of higher education. One is the credentialing, where there were some other comments in chat earlier too, just about what happens to, is it still the monolithic four-year degree, or is it more, does this accelerate another trend around micro-credentialing and sort of deconstructing the certification constructs of higher ed and beyond? And then the second point I think is really interesting, like what do we do about the social function of college, the rite of passage, the emerging emotional needs of parents and families and learners and the workforce? That's some heady stuff. I see Rohit nodding, so I must have gotten a little heady.
Well, it's interesting, and I know Shannon's at Emory where I did my undergrad, and I think, social is one aspect of it, but I think as we get older, and myself definitely, we maybe undervalue just how much we learned how to become a person through some of those experiences, right? Like having a roommate that you didn't like, or just going through the process of being on your own and having to navigate all this stuff on your own, or learning how to become a leader because you're surrounded by peers. And I mean, these are the sorts of things that happen through that on-campus experience when it's good, right? And it doesn't have to be a super top tier college where that happens, but just being around people who are your age, being inspired by those people who choose to spend their time teaching. Those are the really tough. I mean, the credentialing you can recreate. Like I can take a certification course online, and it can be world class. I mean, if I'm going to learn how to play the banjo from Steve Martin, like I can take a master class on that, right? And I can pay my $50 and there it is, right? But that's not the same as this kind of extended experience.
I would plus one what you're saying. I think the credentialing online is going to be doable. I actually think, and I think you've touched this a couple of times in your trend, there's going to be a move back to in-person work and in-person aspects of like building like leadership groups, like we're leadership boot camps, for example, or some other element where we can go climb Mount Everest together as kids, like shared experiences where kids and young college students can get that same experience. Like some of the things I valued most in my college career was like traveling abroad with my friends, where we got to see a new place and we studied, or even taking trips where we were just socially bonded. I think those things are going to come out as like almost many gap year projects or mini summer school, rather than going to do an intern. I'll go do that now because I'm probably doing my intern all year round. Yeah,
and a lot of that'll be digital too. So like just travel, move to virtual. How do we understand how technology relates to this stuff? I think it's really interesting. There's also a book recommendation I wanted to make. Dr. Jean Twenge wrote a book called iGen about what's traditionally called Generation Z. Like there already were some patterns prior to COVID around that generation where they were generally staying closer to home, They were using social media more. They were sort of facing some challenges around really getting out into the world. That's going to be compounded by some of these forces. And, you know, another trend we've been looking at a lot on Trending in Education is just all the macro trends around behavioral health, you know, social isolation, loneliness, screen addiction. Not to get too somber about this, but like there were some serious challenges that we were all facing prior to the pandemic. And now the pandemic has accelerated those as well. So it's another place where, you know, activating around learning interventions is one aspect of it, but other, like, you know, treat the whole person, understand the full context of what we're all grappling with in this day and age. I have found it to be like the shared experience of suffering, as funny as it sounds, I guess not funny, but as strange as it might sound, I think has been a real bonding opportunity, like a global bonding that has happened. It's like when the asteroid is coming, suddenly we all unite. You know, the plague is almost affecting a little bit of that in terms of how we all are experiencing our lives. So, please, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that that one of the things that has certainly started to happen, I think will definitely happen much more, is that those times when we do get together in person become more intentional and precious for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's already starting to happen in terms of like when you go out and when you take like that one day when you do that hike outside and you go outside and you kind of have that moment, and it becomes much more meaningful as a result of that. And I think that will continue to the sense of people deciding this is worth my time and perhaps my risk.
Right.
To be outside and to be doing this because I'm getting something valuable from it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Melissa.
I mean, no, I was just gonna, humans crave interaction with other humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see a world where we don't go back outside, right? Like that is a world that is gonna have a whole new set of social dynamics. And I think it was a New York Times article that said the pandemics don't end, right? Until people decide to end them, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I'm paraphrasing it, like we are going to get fed up with being inside, and we are going to just say the risk is now worth it for us to go back outside. That's how this is going to.
And I think the market will respond too. Like there will be new ways to mitigate your risk.
Yeah.
It does remind me of Andy Duke, who was a guest on the show, the poker player, wrote a book called Thinking in Bets. To your point, Rohit, I think we're all kind of doing risk arbitrage in our life every day now, where like, do I really need to go to the groceries, or is Instacart working? Or, you know, like the sort of trade-offs that we make. And then the idea that you can actually invest in the direct human contact that we're all craving. And there probably will be a rebound, I would expect, particularly if we can get some safety measures, at least for some segments that are out there.
I mean, of the countries that have opened back up, right, the people have already gone back to normal, right? Like a lot of people have already gone back to normal. Like a handful of people are wearing masks, others are not. Like it is, I think we're going to get desensitized. I may be the lone voice here. I think we're going to get desensitized to the risk of the coronavirus. When it was new, it was fearful, but I can see it in my everyday actions. I was neurotic at the start. I was wiping down my groceries. I was like, Now I'm like, we'll see where it goes. I'll wash my hands.
Depends on how many waves there are, though. So I think if it is like a one wave and done, I think you're right. But if it is like a whack-a-mole scenario where like we think we have a beat and then it comes back in certain regions, I think that's a scenario that at least is out there.
I think for sure it's going to come back. And I think the next time it comes back, we will not treat it as seriously. Like, I honestly, truly believe that humans crave being with humans, and that is ultimately going to dictate how we respond to it.
Well, I think that, I think you're right, but I think the other piece of it is, the dangerous part about this whole virus is that the people who already feel invincible are the ones who've been least affected.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so they're going to feel even more invincible. And so right now it's kind of become hey, wear a mask, protect those people you love who are vulnerable, as opposed to you're going to get sick yourself.
Right.
And that's an easier situation to eventually say, I can't do this anymore.
Right. And that's to me, I know we're way over on time. This has been an amazing conversation. Happy to go as long as we want to go. But I also think there's been an awakening around generational thinking that we've talked about on the show as well. And I'd love to get everyone's like all the panelists' perspective. Feel free to join us in chat too. Like how prior to this there was a little bit of like okay boomer and sort of a Lord of the Flies dynamic among the generations. If anything,
X for life.
Yeah, if anything, there's a lot of Gen X represented. Although I think Dan may be a cuspy millennial, so thank you for the diversity play there. But yeah, I mean the generational thinking and maybe parting thoughts too, because we are getting close to concluding. It's been an amazing conversation here too. So it's definitely, I know this is a test balloon for you, Rohit, but it does seem like there is a tremendous interest and engagement in this. So thanks to everyone who's joined us, who's been able to lean in that way. But as we're getting closer to wrap, maybe we could go Dan, Melissa, and Rohit. Any concluding thoughts? And then we'll try to track what's going on in the chat and maintain the engagement that we've seen really throughout. So thanks to everyone who's been here. But stick around because we got our parting thoughts. So Dan, and then we'll roll around.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone who was here. It was great to reach out and have the interaction there. Thanks to Rohit, Mike, and Melissa. For me, I think we're still in the thick of so many things that we're having trouble seeing what's next, right? We're trying to focus on the fall, trying to focus on what happens next. And so many people are making predictions, college and school-wise, that we're just trying to get a sense of it as it's coming in. I think that the next 4 to 6 weeks as places open up, when talk about COVID, is going to be what marks the rest of the summer. If we see a surge again, it's going to make 2020 classes seem really unlikely in the fall. But I think there's a lot to be excited about when it comes to learning, when it comes to education. There is a lot of things that are happening quickly here, and people are being forced to think differently about how they learn and how they want to learn moving forward. And I think, to your point before, everybody made mention of it, it's a time to try things out and try new things and see if they work for you. And Rohit, I think you put it perfectly before. Do I have to do this? Is this something I need to do? Do I need to travel to meet with someone, or can I hop on the phone like we used to do? Isn't that just fine? Can I get away with a 35-hour work week, or can I work an extra longer day on Monday and not work at all on Friday? I think there's a lot of things that can be changed around in the way we go about our lives. So really excited to see what's next.
Awesome. Melissa, wrapping it up.
Wrapping it up, and I'll touch on your generational divide comment too. One, thank you for having me here. Next time I will do a tech check ahead of time, so hopefully my audio was not too terrible for the rest of this once I got it together. Look, it has been fascinating to me. Like a friend of mine joked with me, right? Like I've never seen, because I have a lot of millennial friends and I always attack them. This was the first, yes, Dan. This is the first time we brought Gen Xers and millennials together in a common cause, because I think older millennials and most of the Gen Xers, we were stuck in a world where like we had to take care of our parents and our kids. And like, so we were the most risk averse, right? And we're like, the boomers didn't care. They were like, we're going out anyway. I don't know what you want us to do. What is this Amazon food that you talk about? And the millennials think they're, the people below the millennials think they were invincible. So like, I am pleasantly surprised to see I have a lot more in common with my millennial friends than I once thought, would be my closing advice to this. On the educational thing, I will plus one to what Dan said. This is a time to go fast and break things. This is an opportunity to reinvent what has been traditionally a very slow moving industry. And I think technology is going to play a part of it. For anyone who's talked to me knows, I think data is going to play a huge part of how we do this. And so I'm looking forward to the innovation that's going to come out of this space.
And don't forget the humans. I'm #Team Human. Remember that, Melissa. The technology. And speaking of #Team Human, we have Rohit, who is the human who's going to bring it home. So Rohit, concluding thoughts.
Yeah, bring it home. Look, I think that it was a time before where maybe we were in the downside of what we were in with education was it was a lot like a buffet. And if you think about like your behavior at a buffet, like you just load up your plate with all sorts of stuff. Some of it's total crap. You know, you're not going to eat it. You definitely don't need some of it, but you're like, you know, it's there. Who cares? And now I think we're in this moment where like we're in the really nice restaurant. We're looking at that and saying, do I really want this? Like, should I spend my time on this? Should I spend my time on that? Where should I actually spend my time? Like, what's going to be the most useful way for me to do this? And for kids, maybe they don't get as much of a choice, but us as parents, we're kind of thinking that through with them and saying, where are you going to be learning some of these things? Are you going to be behind in terms of what you were expected to do from a curriculum point of view? But we're all behind together. It's not like you're getting left behind and everybody else is surging ahead either. And so I think that, yeah, we're refiguring out how to interact with one another. If teachers, they're figuring out how to instruct with more virtual tools. They're at maybe opening their mind to using more third-party content than maybe they would have otherwise, like get your students to watch this video, that video, things that are outside of the curriculum, you know.
Listen to a podcast, maybe
listen to a podcast. Yeah. Listen to smart guys like all of you and women like all of you. Right. And I think that it's, what it does is it really opens our mind to how we are able to learn and how we're able to teach, and gives us the permission to innovate, where before we would have said, look, it wasn't broke before, it was okay, and we're fine with okay. And now we don't have to be fine with okay. We can actually move it forward. And I think that's really, if there's a message of hope in all of this, to me, it's that we can reinvent the way that we've been teaching, the way that we've been learning, to make it more optimal, to maybe even get smarter ourselves, and to push this forward in a way that won't go backwards once this pandemic does end.
Amazing input. We'll use hopefully all of this as a podcast episode for Trending in Education. And special thanks to you, Rohit, for getting this group together. The engagement in the chat really was fantastic, and it looks like we're just kind of scratching the surface in terms of the emerging interest out there. So thanks again to you and the Non-Obvious Company for A, your thought leadership, but then B, corralling everyone into this format, which I think it was pretty exciting to be a part of, and look forward to doing more of it in the future.
Yeah, me too. And look, we're going to send a follow-up email to everyone who was registered on the Zoom webinar. For those of you who are watching on Facebook, you may not have realized we actually had this as a webinar. And so we had close to 300 people who were kind of coming in and out at various points. A lot of people stayed on for the majority of the time. And there was a great conversation over there. There's a good conversation on social media. Like Mike said, it was sort of an experiment into this idea of a non-obvious virtual summit. I think we've taken some learnings from this, because we're all innovating and we're all learning, right? And we're going to use those as we come up with future topics to talk about, which hopefully will be of interest as well. And so those will be coming in the next several weeks and months as well. But thank you, all of you guys, for joining this chat. Thank you to everybody who watched and listened. We really appreciate you, and we are just glad that we're lucky enough to be here talking about this sort of thing. So thank you.